Well, it's September the 4th, and a lot of things have been happening. We've spent a lot of time in the last videos covering the debacle in Afghanistan, so I want to address something else to begin with today, and that is this Texas abortion law issue that's come up. And essentially, as always, the abortion providers have tried to file a lawsuit in federal court, and they basically failed to get an injunction to prevent the law from getting into effect at the district, Fifth Circuit, and at the Supreme Court level, the latter being a 5-4, which has caused a lot of uproar on the left. And it's an interesting issue that's come up here, because it looks like one of the idiosyncrasies of this law is it's sort of empowered basically private citizens, which mostly would be, pro-life activists, who will be able to file lawsuits and will be given $10,000 if they're successful, as well as to support their, pay their legal fees. And I guess that's if they find somebody violating the law. Now, the essence of the law is what's called a heartbeat law, which is basically trying to define that after 6 weeks, if they can detect, I guess by ultrasound, that there's any kind of a heartbeat, and I guess this is a controversial thing I was reading yesterday. I don't know much about the actual issue in terms of physiology or anything, but effectively it bans abortions after 6 weeks. And the problem with it, one of the issues about that is that the bulk of women won't necessarily even fully realize they're pregnant at that point, or they'll have a very short decision time to make a choice. And so effectively it's supposed to ban something like 85% of all abortions effectively. And so at any rate, one of the reasons I think why they were probably unable to be successful is normally they essentially you can't sue the government of Texas under this, because it isn't really the government of Texas that would be doing it. It'd be these various activists. And since no case has been filed yet, they really don't have the normal standing to actually pursue it. The general theory is also, does this mean that the court is prepared to actually, reverse Roe v. Wade? That's another, issue that's sort of out there. And of course, that the timeliness of this can be a little bit dangerous, because remember, there's still a group of people work on a commission trying to recommend ways to rig the Supreme Court. And so perhaps the timeliness isn't exactly the best from that point of view. It might have been better to have that issue over with. However, the driving factors behind that are probably still there anyhow. Although this could add some emotional momentum to the left's position. Anyway, if you like these videos, remember if you haven't subscribed yet, to subscribe. And if you have, you can click that bell for notifications. And particularly, I appreciate giving me a like, because that helps out with the algorithm, so other people might see it that haven't subscribed. Okay, so anyway, so that's the situation right on that at the moment. The court no court has ruled on at the federal level on the legitimacy of that law, but they failed to stop it from going into effect. Now I guess the first time that there actually is a lawsuit brought by one of these activists, then they can refile, I guess, based on that situation, and see if the courts will be more favorable at that point in time. It also gives the courts, I guess, a little bit of time to kind of see what the reaction to all this will be too. And so, obviously, if you're pro-life, this is a good thing. If you're pro-abortion, obviously, this is a bad thing. If you're pro-legitimate constitutional law, you'd probably realize that Roe v. Wade was a completely inappropriate decision in the first place, and that there's no such right in the Constitution, and therefore it was made out of whole cloth, and the whole issue would rationally be left to states or legislation. So at any rate, but nonetheless, rather than having the courts continue to rule over what the states can do, let the people of the states rule over what the states do, would be the position that I would take partly. And also, since I'm on the pro-life side of things, the only thing is I'm always worried about going so far you create a backlash, and that's one of the things as to how far you can effectively restrict this, and not have a backlash. But we'll just have to see how it plays out at the moment. right now, again, to do it for the Democrats to really do anything substantively about this other than to support the pro-abortion forces in court with the Justice Department, as I can see it, basically would be to effectively, it would be to rig the court to actually add more justices and then put ultra liberals on it. But right now, that would require ending the filibuster, which is why I've always emphasized this big issue. There's some big things at stake here. This is some Senate rule procedure, but it has dramatic implications if it were to be done. And then they could use a 51 to 50 vote using the vice president to make their changes. Right now, it looks still like there's 2 members of the Senate that don't want to go along with this publicly, and perhaps there's other members privately that don't want to do this. But again, an issue like this might jar a few people off of dead center, and that's why I see it somewhat risky in that sense. So it's something to keep an eye on. It'll also be interesting to see what the courts actually rule going forward. For instance, they haven't ruled that the law is legitimate either. They simply failed to put a stay on it, and that doesn't necessarily indicate how things will play out. And there could very well be, even on the Supreme Court level, people like, say, Kavanaugh, who might be on the fence on the subject a little bit, potentially. I don't know. However, I think most of the conservatives on the court are Catholics, and if they're following church teachings, you'll have that issue too. Anyway, I just want to kind of hit that issue. I think it's kind of interesting that it's going to involve a lot of private citizens. The other aspect is that you could actually go after people violating this law, even if you do things like give them a ride to the clinic. And of course, I'm pretty sure that, like most outpatient procedures that are somewhat serious, that would be required by the clinic to have somebody there to take you home, right, in case there's complications. So I think that this is an interesting, wide-reaching law. And on the other hand, I mean, let's look at the other aspect of it. Even if Roe v. Wade were completely overturned, different states there's almost always neighboring states where people could go to where it wouldn't be. They're not going to ban abortion in California or New York or Massachusetts, etc., or probably even Minnesota. So, for instance, people from Iowa or the Dakotas could go to Minnesota. People from Texas could go to Colorado or New Mexico. In other words, any neighboring Democrat state could probably provide them what they need anyhow. So, and probably clinics would then migrate to the borders of these states. This is one of those kind of things. Now, I don't know if that law about transporting would, if somebody drives them there, but, I guess I'm sure that the other side can come up with a solution to that problem too. And that's why this will be an ongoing battle, obviously. But it is interesting that the court has now changed quite a bit because of the Trump appointees to where it's possible Roe v. Wade will be axed. I'm not sure if it will or not, but we'll have to stay tuned. Okay, another issue that's come up very interesting is I understand that there's been a bit of a clash between Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Bernie Sanders over the $3.5 trillion social programs bill. And apparently Manchin has held to the position in an op-ed piece effectively that we should put a pause on passing this bill at the moment, noting that the $1.2 trillion mostly or more legitimately infrastructure bill is now waiting for a vote in the House, and they're supposed to get one according to the deal that the moderates did with Pelosi by the 27th of September. By putting that on pause, that would be a way to get that bill passed into law before the other bill came up for real discussion, which would give them the moderates more leeway to whittle it down, to soften it. I'm not sure on here that whether Manchin and company are really planning on literally killing the whole bill, which would be my vote. Don't do it. I think we've had enough extreme spending right now. Let's quit the spending and kind of settle down to try to get the economy of the country into a more rational basis. Or it could be a political posturing. I mean, for instance, since half of his voters pretty much voted for Trump, he may want to give the image of somebody more moderate. So by holding this process up for a few weeks, even if he only votes for it, it still gives him that aura. Or is he actually maybe negotiating for something for the state of West Virginia? I mean, maybe on that side he wants to plus up some spending, for instance. Again, I don't know. We do know that when Robert Byrd was the big honcho from West Virginia, there was a lot of public works named after Robert Byrd in West Virginia. So we'll just have to wait and see. And that was his mentor. So we'll just have to see how that pans out. I mean, I always call this a year of living dangerously, and the last two topics definitely fall in that category. So, we will just have to stay tuned in and watch those developments. I guess right now it looks like Joe Biden's poll numbers have fallen to pretty low levels, depending on which poll you watch. I follow Rasmussen. I think his total approval is at 44%, and his strong approval is at 24% in the last poll. This Afghanistan debacle has really hurt him, and I think just the general image overall, the situation the country's in is probably not helping him. He's even losing some credit on the COVID thing, like he's really good for COVID. I don't know why, because he wears a mask all the time. As we well know, masks are somewhere between totally ineffective to only marginally effective at best. I think somebody came up with a study from Bangladesh that said it might be as high as 10% effective. Might, and apparently it's somewhat considered to be a flawed study by critics. So I doubt it's even that effective. But the point is, nonetheless, the key thing, if you want to do something about it, is obviously get the vaccine, although the vaccines themselves are under stress from this Delta variant. And I understand it's the Pfizer vaccine that's most impacted by this, that right now the Moderna is actually doing better relatively, where early on it was the Pfizer that did better. So judge that for what it's worth. I mean, it probably is because the breakthrough case may have evolved in an area where there's a lot of people that had the Pfizer vaccine and it found its way around that one first, more than likely, if anything, or it could be how quickly they just fade naturally. I'm tending to think these vaccines are going to be a little bit like the annual flu shot, bad news there, right? But it's a virus, and viruses mutate. As we well know, the flu shot was fairly effective against the virus strains it was designed for, and it's often quite ineffective against the virus strains it wasn't designed for. So that may mean that there has to be updates over time, although right now there's a big battle, as I understand, in the technical experts and the FDA, whether any kind of booster shot is even necessary at the moment. So we really don't know exactly what's going on here. I'm really not seeing the good data on that. What I did see today, though, as I did my morning update on my charts, is that for the first time, the number of new cases on the Friday accumulation, which is reported, which I get on Saturday morning by just doing the 5:30 report from Johns Hopkins from yesterday to today and taking the difference, it's down for the first time in a long time, which indicates, like I've been saying, I think this current wave is starting to reach a peak, and that's the first solid sign that, other than the shape of the curve, that it's beginning to look like now that it actually didn't produce more this week than last week at the same time. So then the average is going down because of that. So that's a good sign. Of course, anything can happen. There's a lot of erratic reporting, so I wouldn't I'd kind of wait another couple of weeks to get some confirmation before I really would take this to the bank, so to speak. But important piece of development. And finally, let's review a little bit one of the latest things on Afghanistan. I didn't want to highlight this again because I've done so many Afghanistan videos in a row. But this is important, that the Reuters got a transcript of a phone call between the former president of Afghanistan and President Biden, in which Biden was basically admitting he knew that things were going bad in Afghanistan, even though publicly he was saying the opposite. And he was also encouraging the president of Afghanistan to lie in order to support that position. And perhaps threatening to withhold air support and so forth if he didn't do it, which is very reminiscent of what the Democrats went off and impeached Trump over in the first impeachment, which was an absurd action, by the way, in my opinion, totally ridiculous. They're really debasing the whole constitutional principle of impeachment by trying to use it for things like this. which of course has led to calls for Republicans to impeach Biden. Although the real reason to impeach Biden, I don't think is that phone call. A much better thing would be is a failure to enforce the border immigration laws at the border. I think is way out than what he said to a guy in a phone call, or even the way he's managed the debacle in Afghanistan would be another one. But to actually do it over the phone call, well, at any rate, it's just repetition or copying, basically. But at any rate, with the Democrats in the majority in the House, he's not going to be impeached. I saw some conservative website ratting on Senator McConnell over this, but he's just telling the truth. I guess the question is, do we want to sound like, the radical Democrats, like Maxine Waters against Biden, or do we want to just get on with actually doing real business? And maybe we do want to rant on the guy. I have no problem with anybody that calls for Biden's impeachment. Let's put it that way. But it isn't going to happen at this point in time. And besides, I'm not even going to say the word unfortunately. Do you really look forward to Kamala Harris as president? Or if she were to step down, Nancy Pelosi as president? I don't think so. So that's the reason why that idea doesn't really appeal to me a whole lot. But at any rate, I think that's another development, and we still, as I was saying along, we apparently have large numbers of both American citizens, green card holders, and a lot of these special immigrant visas, people who may very well be executed if they're identified, that are still trapped in Afghanistan. And the word is that a lot of people that were involved fighting against the Taliban are being located and executed. So apparently the new Taliban it doesn't exist. It's just the old Taliban with more weapons. And so basically that kind of summarizes my video for today. I just want to hit all those topics, and we're going to have to see what develops on the legislation in the next few weeks here, because it's going to be kind of a tense time, I think. I'm hoping for the best that we can block some of the worst initiatives the Democrats have, but we just don't know yet. So, by the way, you can follow me on social media for updates between these videos, because I do post on Twitter and Gab and Parler. I'm probably primarily on Twitter, but I try to put some of the key ones on the other two, as well as posting videos, links there. Okay, I'm closing this for now. Until next time.